Good morning. Welcome to the National Press Club, the place where news happens. I'm Mike Balsamo, the 118th president of the National Press Club and the national law enforcement editor at the Associated Press. Today we're joined by the presidents of the American Postal Workers Union, the National Association of Letter Carriers, and the National Rural Letter Carriers Association, three unions that represent the backbone of the United States Postal Service workforce. Their members are the people who sort your mail, fix your postal trucks, sell you stamps, and deliver to 169 million addresses in cities and small towns, 6 days a week and increasingly 7. This event was scheduled weeks ago, but the timing has become all the more urgent. Just yesterday, Postmaster General Louis DeJoy announced his resignation, ending nearly 5 turbulent years as head of the United States Postal Service. His tenure sparked fierce debate over mail delays, cost-cutting, facility closures, and the broader questions of what kind of institution the United States Postal Service should be. He framed these changes under a 10-year plan called Delivering for America. Now, as the USPS celebrates its 250th anniversary, we find the agency at a defining moment. It remains the largest unionized employer in the country and one of the few federal agencies that touches every American, no matter where they live. But major reforms are still underway. Service standards are shifting, facilities are being consolidated, and questions continue to grow about whether USPS will remain a government service or become something more transactional. Today's discussion isn't just about labor, contracts, or cost-cutting. It's about something bigger. It's about whether the United States Postal Service will continue to be what it was designed to be, a public service, serving everyone, no matter your zip code, or whether it becomes something else entirely. With major reforms still underway, DeJoy's departure leaves key questions on the table. What kind of postal service do Americans want? Who is it for? And how can the American people, with the help of policymakers and postal leadership, ensure it remains strong, equitable, and truly national for workers, for communities, and for the next generation? We've prepared a number of questions for our panelists today, some developed by the Press Club's headliners team and others submitted in advance by other members of the National Press Club. As always, we'll take questions from the audience and try to get in as many as time permits. If you're here in the room, you can submit questions by writing them on one of the cards placed on your seat and passing them to a staff member around the room. For those watching online, you can send your questions by email to headliners@press.org. That's HEADLINERS@press.org with the subject line mail. Now, let me formally introduce our panelists. Mark Dimondstein is president of the 200,000-member American Postal Workers Union. He's held that position since 2013 and began his postal career in Greensboro, North Carolina. His members include clerks, mail sorters, vehicle technicians, and other essential support staff. Brian Renfroe is president of the 295,000-member National Association of Letter Carriers. He began as a city carrier in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and was elected national president in 2022. His members are the people delivering mail and packages to your homes and businesses day in and day out. And Donald Maston leads the 133,000-member National Rural Letter Carriers Association. He started as a rural carrier in California and was elected national president in 2023. His members serve communities across the country, often remote, often underserved, delivering mail and packages using their own vehicles to some of the toughest routes in America. One quick note before we begin, today's audience includes members of these three unions. For those watching online, if you hear reactions from the room, applause, laughter, or strong responses, please know that's likely coming from our guests and not from reporters or members of the National Press Club here in the room with us today. With that, let me welcome our panelists to the National Press Club, and we'll jump right into the conversation. So, gentlemen, thank you for being here at the National Press Club. Let me start with the news of the day, front of mind for anyone who's been following the Postal Service. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy officially resigned yesterday after 5 turbulent years in charge. He oversaw sweeping operational changes, some praised as necessary modernization, others criticized as dismantling core services. From your perspective, what does DeJoy's resignation mean for the future of the Postal Service, and what do you believe must change starting now to rebuild trust with the public and with postal workers? Brian, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, over the last 5 years or so, our union has worked in good faith with Postmaster General DeJoy. In your opening comments, you mentioned that it has been a bit of a turbulent time, which is true. And I will, however, give now former Postmaster General DeJoy credit for one thing, doing something that is very difficult to do in an organization the size of the Postal Service, and that is initiate, frankly, a long overdue modernization effort. In any sort of overhaul like that, the devil, of course, is in the details. And while there are certainly parts of that effort over the years that have resulted in service challenges and things like that that we have worked really hard to address, it is important in a general sense to continue modernizing the Postal Service, because what the Postal Service has, though it's changing, is a network that was created to process and deliver a mail mix from decades ago. That mail mix has changed significantly over the years. We handle far fewer letters and what we call flat size mail and far more parcels. So it's very important that it is modernized. It's very important that we invest in the infrastructure, and whoever is the next Postmaster General, in order to do such an investment, has to do it, number one, with service in mind. Number two, of course, valuing the employees, because ultimately the service that happens at the Postal Service is 100% provided by the employees that our unions represent.
Mark, let me ask you a little bit more about the former Postmaster General. So DeJoy repeatedly framed his role, as fixing a broken business model, but many employees at the Postal Service saw that as code for cutting jobs and closing facilities. In your direct dealings with him, did you find him to have respected the role of unions in shaping USPS policy, or do you think he saw labor as an obstacle?
Well, that's an interesting question. Good morning. Thanks
for
having us. Can I go now? I think that Louis DeJoy, in my experience and our experience, generally respected the unions, but you have natural disagreements and arguments and differences. But we were able to resolve some very difficult issues, such as we have a non-career workforce when people first get hired, and it was a real problem with retention, and it was a real problem with wages and benefits. And we were able to work out some changes together that gave at least our folks who are non-career a better path to career, for example. But I do think when we talk about Louis DeJoy and the PMG and what just happened yesterday, it has to be in the context of what's happening in the moment. We have a White House administration that is openly talking about privatizing the public postal service, selling it off, breaking it up to private corporations for private profit. And whatever people thought about Louis DeJoy, and we had some very much agreements on the need for change and some disagreements on how that change was taking place, but whatever people thought about Louis DeJoy, he did not prove to be a privatizer. So there's a contradiction now and a conflict with what's going on. And it's my belief that Louis DeJoy was pushed out by this administration to help pave the way for some of their plans, which we'll talk about more, I'm sure, in this hour.
So for anyone who wants to take this one, right, DeJoy's resignation, there's now a major leadership vacancy at a time when the Postal Service is facing declining mail volume, rising labor tensions, and mounting pressure to maintain service, ahead of midterm elections. The Board of Governors will be responsible for choosing the next Postmaster General. What qualities do you think are essential in that Postmaster General, and how much influence do you think your union should have in that selection process?
Well, I'll go ahead and take that one. Bit of a complex question. The makeup of the Board of Governors certainly is going to have a lot of influence on who the next Postmaster General will be and how that individual will view privatization, working with the labor unions, continuing with the Delivering for America plan that Louis DeJoy started. And I will echo what my brothers and sisters, or my brothers up here, indicated with the previous Postmaster General. We may not have always agreed on some of the directions, but there was a realization that the Postal Service is becoming a parcel delivery dominant mail mix. We still have the universal service obligation, especially for the rural constituents that we represent. How the Postmaster General, who is sitting in that chair, and how they work with the unions, and how the Board of Governors and the nation as a whole views this talk of privatization disproportionately would impact our rural communities and our rural carriers, who are the lifeblood and the fabric that holds these communities together, who are oftentimes many miles away from post offices. And the parcels and the changes that Louis put into place to grow the parcel business and see the vision of that, the Postmaster General who comes in, whoever the Board of Governors selects, needs to be in harmony with the plan as it's already been designed and is moving forward, because that is truly for all of us up here, and specifically for the rural constituents out there in America, able to receive their medicine, their goods, their products and services out on the rural routes, which are oftentimes hundreds of miles away from the post office. They need to take that into consideration and not leave them behind.
Thanks. Mark and Brian, let me ask you both this question. So in the past week, APWU and NALC have held hundreds of actions across the country. Can you talk a little bit about the purpose of those protests and what you saw from your members out there?
Yeah, so just Sunday, March 23rd, our union held rallies all over the country. We had somewhere in the neighborhood of 275 events that were all designed to do one thing, and that is send a very loud, clear, concise message that our answer to the administration's consideration, as reported about a month ago, of making these drastic changes to the Postal Service, such as moving them under the Department of Commerce and firing the Board of Governors and firing the PRC. What we're talking about here, and the President even confirmed on February 21st, is some sort of privatization model. Our answer to those proposals is hell no. It's a terrible idea for 300 and something million Americans. It's a terrible idea for everyone that we serve. Don mentioned there are 51 million people in this country that live in rural areas that depend on the Postal Service. There's 8 million jobs in this country that center around the Postal Service. There's 640,000 jobs at the Postal Service, hundreds of thousands of which the three of us represent. Privatization is a terrible idea. Our message is no. Private business is interested in doing things that are profitable, as they should be. But that is the distinction between private business and what we are, a public service, where we serve everyone, everywhere, no matter where they live, for the same price every day. So the intent of the actions we did yesterday were to get that message out, make the public aware that this is under consideration and that it is bad for everyone involved except the select few that believe they could profit off of destroying the Postal Service.
And our day a few days earlier, and we supported each other and were out there with each other, had a similar goal. I've been quoting Paul Revere in his Midnight Riot of "The British Are Coming." We were out there telling them, sharing with the people of the country that the privatizers are coming, and it would be devastating for you and your really constitutional right to postal services. So the privatizers are coming. We wanted to let the public know, we leafleted the public, that this is really a struggle between Wall Street and Main Street. That's the only way that we can understand, and I think the people can understand, why anybody would want to privatize. A few people would gain more wealth, a few quick dollars, but the real shareholders of the Postal Service, the people of the country, would lose out with higher prices, less service, and of course the workers with less wages and benefits and rights, which also, rather than build strong communities, weakens our communities. So we spread the word on this. This is Wells Fargo. You don't have to listen to me about Wall Street. Salivating because of all the talk in the administration about the new opportunities for investment and the new opportunities to raise parcel prices. up to 130% if they could break out the parcel business from the public postal service. The privatizers are coming. Elon Musk is not about efficiency. He's about picking your pocket, turn it over to private profit, laugh all the way to the bank, and the people of the country are left holding the bag. However we use the post office, it belongs to us. So we had a similar message. The U.S. mail is not for sale. Hands off the public post office. The post office belongs to the people, not the billionaires, and that's what we were out doing. And we know that day was not an end, it's a beginning. We're in this campaign with the people of the country for a long time, and we plan to win.
And Michael, if I could add on to that, the APWU had their day of action on the 20th. The NALC had their rallies on the 23rd. Our representatives all across the country stood shoulder to shoulder with our brothers and sisters. The messaging is very clear. Later today on Capitol Hill, we're having a rally that's going to be featuring bipartisan support. We've got 100 of our state union leaders that are in from all over the country here to talk to Congress, but more importantly, we have representatives from both Republican and Democrat side of the parties who have openly and publicly supported the idea that the United States Postal Service cannot be privatized and are going to stand up and are moving on legislation, including House Resolution 70, which is the messaging today to try to get them on. So it is a orchestrated effort between all of the unions, and getting bipartisan support from Congress is really where the task lies, and where the American people get the message, and the constituents in the city and the rural areas make their congressional representatives aware on a bipartisan front that we're not going to stand for it. So that's ours is going to be happening today.
And Don, let me stay with you for this question. So how do you think the service standard changes going to affect starting April 1st will affect postal workers and customers, especially in those rural communities? Maybe you could talk a little bit more about the impact to rural America.
Well, the impact for rural America, we have 130,000 career and non-career rural letter carriers. They serve over 51 million rural Americans each and every single day, travel 3.7 million miles to reach them down gravel country, dirt roads in many cases. A lot of times those customers rely on the goods and the services that through the universal service obligation they're able to afford and have delivered. An example would be an elderly person who relies on their medications being delivered by their rural carrier miles away from the city. They may not, if that were to be privatized and put up for profit organizations to take over and make money off of, they may not be able to afford it. It could be eliminated altogether for the rural customers, or priced to a point where they couldn't afford it, and then they would have to make a decision of whether they went to town the 50 miles to get their medication, or whether they just did without their medication. So, I mean, that's just one example. And we actually have a rural carrier in the room, Tamika Brown. She serves a rural route. If we could get her a microphone, she might be able to answer how that would impact her customers out on her rural route. Tamika?
Hello, everybody. It would definitely have a huge impact on my customers. I work outside of the state capital. I'm from Louisiana. I have a rural delivery in a town called Denham Springs, which is outside the state capital, and it will definitely impact my customers. In fact, one of my customers texted me this morning because they were worried about contact lenses that they needed, but their car broke down and they couldn't get it, and it wasn't in their mailbox. So I sent the message over to the clerk of my office to let them know. So we found the package and someone's going to bring it to him. But in situations like that, they depend on us. So it's more than just delivering the mail and parcels, but we're a service to them. So I can go on with many other stories, but they're scared. They'll be at the mailbox waiting for us. What can they do to help us? And like I tell them, call your elected officials. Because we're like the lifeline for them. So if we're not, we're the face for them. So we had a situation in Louisiana. Not too long ago with the snowstorm, and they never had snow like this, and the mail service stopped for 2 days. And when we did resume, there was like such a relief on their faces when they saw us again, because they knew it was back to normalcy in Louisiana. So it's a lot that we do, and we're scared, and we're just trying to fight for the American people.
All right, thank you, Tamika.
Brian, let me ask you this question. So we've seen early retirement agreements, hiring freezes in some regions, and growing delivery routes, especially in rural areas, but in cities as well. Are your members effectively being asked to shoulder more with fewer people? And if so, what's the breaking point?
Well, I guess I'll let Mark speak to the early retirements. That's not something that's impacted the members I represent or our craft. In some ways, over the last 40, 50 years, letter carriers have shouldered more work in a shorter period of time. We become more productive. We deliver more than we ever have. But there's not, other than sort of the day-to-day pressure of the job, which is a lot, there's not been any noticeable change in recent times. I will mention, and then let Mark comment on the agreements that he and one of our other sister unions did. There has been no need or really engagement between us and the Postal Service about any sort of retirement incentive for our craft, because our staffing from a national perspective is pretty well aligned with the work. We do, of course, have isolated locations where we face some challenges in staffing, but there is certainly no need to reduce the amount of staffing we have among the city carriers that I represent. In fact, any reduction in the staffing that we have would directly result in challenges to service and being able to deliver all the mail.
Mark, do you want to?
Well, sure. It's kind of a contradiction for us. Commonly in our part of the postal world, we've seen what we call early out retirement incentives. We have them probably almost every 5 years, and a lot of it's a product of the changing mail, changing equipment, and it does have an impact on the workforce. And on the other hand, we believe that there's whole areas of the postal system that are not staffed well enough. But we did agree to what they call an early out in early January. About 9,000 of the people that we represent took it. That doesn't mean that all of those people will not be replaced. Some of them definitely will need to be replaced and should be, and others may not. But we do believe, as our union, that the people deserve good service in the retail units, at the windows, and we have some real pockets of understaffing there that we have bluntly and frequently raised with management, and we're still looking for relief on that. So we want to make sure that the early out doesn't exacerbate that problem, and we still get the kind of staffing that the people need.
Mark, let me stay with you for this question from National Press Club member and reporter for Federal News Network, Jory Heckman. The U.S. Postal Service says its DOJ team will help review its leases at 31,000 post offices and retail facilities. Do you expect that review will lead to the closure of post offices across the country?
There's certainly some danger signals in that statement. We oppose post office closings. We're not set up to make money in each post office. We're set up to break even as a whole. And when you get too much of this profit motive idea, it's, well, that post office isn't making money, that one's not making money, so we don't need them. And we do. So we're going to keep a very close eye on that. In fact, we have a retail clerk right here, Carice Powell. What would happen, if you could share, what would happen if your local post office closed? How far would people have to go to another town or another community? What would happen? Where would they get the kind of services you provide, if you could share that briefly? If it closed, what would happen?
Good morning, everybody. Carissa Powell, the clerk. Well, we have, at my office, I have older people. It's like their daily routine to come in the post office, buy their stamps, compensate, and most of them is in walking distance. So if they close my post office, they wouldn't, I mean, I can't say how far, how many miles, but they're not capable of walking. Some of them are on walkers. I have a building that's right, like a senior building that's right next to my post office. So if they close my post office, they would be devastated not to see the child in the morning, greeting them, smiling at them, and helping them put their tape on their letter. So I think that would devastate my post office if it closed and they had to go somewhere else, maybe get a ride or metro. So I think it's a convenience for them that they have a post office that close and walking distance to getting their packages and their mailings out to their grandkids or kids or whatever.
Thank you.
Mike, can I add just one thing real quickly? Early on in now former Postmaster General DeJoy's tenure, when he was developing this Delivering for America plan, this was a big topic of conversation. And essentially the message that we sent was, you start trying to close post offices, you're dead in the water. So whether it's Doge, new leadership at the Postal Service, or anybody else, they start trying to close post offices, they're going to have a hell of a fight like they never imagined. That is a primary piece of the important infrastructure for the public service that we provide. And I can assure you, of course, a fight from us, but from those on Capitol Hill, and most importantly, for people in the community like the sister just described that she interacts with every day.
Brian, let me stick with you for this question, because I think this gets to the heart of it, right? The heart of this debate is a very basic question. Is the U.S. Postal Service a public service, or is it a business? And as leaders who represent the people who actually deliver the mail, how would you answer that? And what does that distinction mean for the future of the Postal Service?
I would answer it the way the 1970 Postal Reorganization Act answered it, by creating the Postal Service that we have today. And that is that it is a public service that operates like a business. It operates on the revenue of people that buy stamps and pay postage, not taxpayer funded. And I think it's worked pretty damn well for 55 years. I think hundreds of millions of people that live in this country and have lived in this country over that period of time would agree. So there are absolutely policy changes, restrictions that Congress has put in place that still need to be rectified and need to be fixed. But ultimately, it is a public service. The definition of public service is service for people that is equal no matter where people live at the same cost. But the model is an independent federal agency that does not get taxpayer dollars, that does operate like a business, has worked well, and we need to strengthen that model through some policy changes that we're happy to get into, but by certainly maintaining that public service, because the universal service, the network we have that allows us to reach everywhere every single day, is so valuable to our country.
Why don't we stick with that point? Maybe you can talk a little bit about sort of those policy proposals and what a modernization of the Postal Service should look like to make it work efficiently.
Sure. So on the operational front, I won't get too in-depth, but of course Post Service has just got to have the capacity to process and deliver the mail that we get today. The larger percentage of packages, and there's a lot of details that happy Mark on the mail processing side, of course, would be better suited to talk about those than I would. But on the policy front, we passed a really landmark postal reform bill a couple of years ago that made some changes that are going to have long-term benefits to the Postal Service. There are two particular issues that could provide both immediate and long-term financial relief. One of those has to do with the way the Office of Personnel Management accounts for the hundreds of billions of dollars the Postal Service has already set aside for retirement cost. It's a very economist sort of nerdy calculation, but in a nutshell, there have been studies done on this over the years, and the recommendation would be to simply use standard private sector accounting practices. That could be done administratively by the president, and that is something we have worked on through a number of administrations and continue to work on to hopefully get the Trump administration to do that. The second would require a legislative fix, and that is there are restrictions on the way the Postal Service can invest the roughly $385 billion they have set aside for retirement cost. Unlike most other federal agencies, the Postal Service is very well funded. Its retirement obligations are funded. The problem is they can only be invested in very low yield Treasury bonds. So over time, as things like healthcare costs go up, the money does not grow. Every foreign post on earth can invest the money they've set aside for retirement, except the Postal Service. And you know where all those foreign posts invest their retirement funds? Here in America in the stock market. So this would be a simple legislative change that would allow the Postal Service to invest, not in any aggressive way that would jeopardize the money they've set aside, but to utilize investment strategies that allow the money they've set aside to keep up with the increase in cost as time goes by. It's something that there's been bipartisan support for in the past, so it's a legislative priority in this Congress for us to get that change made, which would give the Postal Service some breathing room short term in terms of amortization cost and things like that they have to pay every year to invest in the infrastructure improvements, but then also, of course, benefit them long term with the obligations that they would have for retirement.
Mark or Don, do you want to add anything on the policy front?
Go ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead. I can.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, I agree with everything that Brian has said. The pre-funding obligation, I think there's a misconception that a lot of Americans had, and I've heard it from, the president himself calling the Postal Service. And it goes back to 2018, the previous term, that we're losers and costing people a lot of money. The reality is the Postal Service was created not to be a profit organization, and the pre-funding obligation that we had came through the PAEA in 2006. We were able to, with assistance from Louis DeJoy, we were able to get that obligation lifted in 2022 through the postal reform. So there are monies that are set aside. We are in a good shape there, but there's a misconception by a lot of people that the taxpayers are the ones that are funding these obligations, when in reality they're already funded. And in most cases, I think they're probably being utilized elsewhere in the federal government, not being set aside where they're supposed to be for the people that they're intended for. Also, I think it's important to note that of our 640, the number changes, but basically 640,000 postal workers we have, 73,000 of these workers are veterans. Good paying jobs for veterans, and the veterans retirement, and they've served our country, they've served the Postal Service, they go to retire. Those monies that are set aside need to be there for the veterans as well. So there's a lot of little known facts within the Postal Service, misconceptions of how 11–12% of the workforce are veterans, and the taxpayer dollars are not who's funding it, and that's a big misconception across this country. So I think that's important to get out.
And if I can add, look, the federal government forces the post office to be a cash cow for them. And I'm not going to repeat what Brian Renfroe raised on that front. They force us into the federal treasury while all the other costs are coming up, and then the post office and therefore the postal customers have to make up for the difference. Then you got those in government saying, look at all the money that is on this sheet in the negative rather than in the positive. So we agree also that we can get some better funding models. And understand, too, that the 1970 law is outdated in terms of how to finance, that really calls forth some changes in our financing. Because it's a pre-internet law. Nobody even dreamed of it. It wasn't even a gleam in anybody's eye. And the internet has had a deep impact on letter mail, flat mail, and revenue. So that is a lot of what's going on. One quick thing about the service versus the business, to build on what Brian raised. It's not titled the United States Postal Business. That's what Wells Fargo wants it to be, the United States Postal Business. As Brian said, the 1970 law says it's the United States Postal Service.
Don, Don, why don't I come to you with this to follow up on something you mentioned earlier. Over 100 of your members are headed to Capitol Hill today. So let me come to you with this question from National Press Club member Bob Wiener. Why is there even a debate about remaining a government service when it's in the Constitution that Congress shall have the power to establish post offices?
Well, the debate comes from statements that have been raised from the current administration and the White House, things that have been said about privatizing the Postal Service, Elon Musk and Doge coming in and taking a look at the Postal Service. We don't know what type of agreements have been made at this point in time. The universal service obligation, the Postal Service itself, was created by Congress. It's enshrined in the Constitution, and any major changes that would have to take place would be a result from Congress, not from an executive order or from Doge coming in and deciding the best way to operate a very complicated and complex business that's logistics and the operations and the manpower that it takes. These are hardworking men and women that keep the Postal Service working every single day. The understanding of how that all ties together and how it all works is very complex and not something that you can just come in and take a look at and say, okay, this is how we're going to fix it. We need to privatize it, make it a for-profit organization, take away the mandates that have been put in place by Congress. Congress would have to take them away. I know I keep saying the same thing, but it's very important for the American people to know that this is we the people own the Postal Service, not the current administration, past administration, or any future administration. We, the people, the American public, it's a service that provides service to the American people, and we are the ones that benefit from it and the ones that actually own the Postal Service, in my view.
Mark, why don't I come to you for this, because it follows up on a statement that you had just made about the sort of digital age and how the internet has sort of adapted in the funding model. So is the current funding model of the USPS self-funding through stamps and services still viable in this digital age, or is it time for Congress to sort of rethink how this essential service is funded?
I think with some changes, some of the changes that Brian Renfroe raised and maybe some others, that it can move forward, but there has to be an adaptation. As I said, the 1970 law was done in a pre-internet period where first-class letter volume was constantly rising. And with the internet, it is declining. There's no debate over that, and packages are rising. So I think some policy changes, as we talked about, are needed. And if they're the right kind of changes, I think the model can work going forward. And there's some other ideas that have been floated around as well. But something does need to be, Congress does need to address, and the administration needs to address some of these challenges.
Brian, why don't I come to you for this one? What is your expectation for what the board is looking for in its search for a new Postmaster General? And what's the relationship, your relationship and the union's collective relationship with the now acting Postmaster General?
Our relationship with the acting Postmaster General goes back a long way. He comes from labor relations and has been our primary counterpart in collective bargaining for really decades now. So I can say that he is someone that very much believes in the Postal Service as a public service. He is a career postal employee, believes in the need to modernize and maintain service. So we do know him very well. That goes for all of us. I think I can speak for the three of us. In terms of what the board is looking for, the current board members, a majority of the board very much supports the public service. I think is looking for someone that would, in a general sense, continue a similar modernization vision that Postmaster General DeJoy had. Not that there would not be some adjustments. That's sort of the normal function of the board, is to govern such things. But in a general sense, I think they would look for someone that maintained that belief in a public service and wanted to continue to modernize while maintaining and improving service. I do know that they are in the search process. They have utilized an outside service firm. I believe the Postal Service put out an official release about that yesterday, so that they are engaged in that search process. And we maintain communication with the board members about, different candidates from time to time, and, certainly as stakeholders representing the people that do the work at the Postal Service, we believe we play an important role in that as well.
I want to pivot for just a minute, and Brian, I want to stay with you for this one. So postal workers have faced an uptick in dog attacks, robberies of carriers, and threats tied to political misinformation about mail-in voting. Are you satisfied with how the Postal Service leadership and law enforcement have been responding to those threats? And what more needs to happen to make sure your members are safe?
Yeah, I mean, we have really, since the pandemic started in 2020, seen a significant uptick in attacks on letter carriers. Just to give a little bit of context, the average number of annual violent crime has tripled from what it was prior to 2020. This has been a multi-year effort for us, of course, communicating with the leadership at the Postal Service, who, takes this very seriously. The Postal Inspection Service, the law enforcement arm, we certainly believe they take it seriously. I mean, they're postal inspectors are public servants just like us, but the fact is the scope of this problem has outgrown their capacity. And we have worked all over the country, along with Don and our brothers and sisters from the rural carriers. We've held events to raise public awareness, which has resulted in some increase in prosecution. But ultimately, the big piece that needs to happen is a bipartisan piece of legislation called the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act that has been reintroduced. It's unfortunately appears to be primarily a product of an increase in crime in general involving the mail during the pandemic, which has led to robberies. Not all of these crimes, but the majority of them are robberies of people trying to gain access to the mail. But it is, of course, at the top of the list of concerns for us with safety. You mentioned during election season, we have had some instances of violence that was, related, frankly, to mostly misinformation about our role. I mean, letter carriers pick up and deliver ballots and don't even give a second thought to who voted for who in that ballot. That's not the way postal employees don't think like that. They don't care what you get in the mail. We don't pay any attention to it. But I do think we did not have a significant number of those attacks during this past election season compared to some of the circumstances we dealt with during 2020. So hopefully we do not see a trend back to some of the things we dealt with in 2020 as it relates to our role in elections.
Let me just follow up on the robberies part of this, because I think it's an undercovered issue. So, are your carriers still being told to complete routes in dangerous conditions, and what guidance are they getting from management? What tangible things sort of like need to happen? You've obviously mentioned legislation, but what needs to happen to make sure they're safe? Yeah,
there's a couple of things. There are sort of what could happen today, and the message to our members and the message from management. I mean, there's exceptions. There's 30,000 post offices. There's idiots out there that say stupid things sometimes. But generally, the message is going to be protect yourself first. You do not protect the mail first. You do not try to fight people. You give people whatever they want, and never hesitate to call for assistance. And the quickest way to call for assistance is to call 911. The message that we send to them is always about safety first. Let me mention a couple specifics that are included in the legislation, but I think are important pieces of this. The primary target of these crimes are keys that letter carriers carry that allow them to access mailboxes. This is for the most part, a manual lock and key system. The Postal Service has done some testing and has begun replacing them with an electronic alternative that is far more secure. It is far less valuable in the hands of someone that steals it because you have control to turn them off, basically limit what someone could access with it. This legislation would appropriate money to speed up that replacement. There are millions of locks around the country, and someone has to physically replace every one of them. So it's quite a big undertaking. The second piece that is important is these crimes are federal crimes, and they are prosecuted at very low rates federally. We've seen some uptick through, I think, a lot of the work we've done over the last couple of years, but they still are prosecuted at a very low rate. Less than 20% of them result in an arrest and a prosecution. This legislation would designate a prosecutor in every United States Attorney's office to prosecute these crimes. Final piece that is important has to do with the sentencing. It is wildly inconsistent. We had a letter carrier in late 2023 in Northern California that was robbed, gun to the carrier's head. Thankfully, the carrier was not seriously physically injured. The inspection service investigated, made an arrest, a successful prosecution, and the individual was sentenced to 30 days in prison. We've had similar events happen in different parts of the country where sentencing has been 7 or 8 years. So the legislation would modify the sentencing guidelines so that crimes committed against postal employees, the sentencing would be the same as those same crimes committed against federal law enforcement officers. Because ultimately what we have to change is the view of postal employees as federal employees. For the longest time, we were viewed among most people as these are federal employees. Don't mess with them. If you mess with them, you're going to go to jail. We've got to make that a reality again, and that's really what this legislation is about.
And Michael, if I could add on to that just a little bit. It is a Protect Our Letter Carriers Act, and it involves city and rural letter carriers. That could be a city carrier that's in a downtown setting who's approached at gunpoint. It could be a rural carrier who's out in the middle of the country with no one to help. They're trying to gain access to the mail. But I also want to point out that there are window clerks that are also in harm's way. Harm to one is harm to all. So the title of the bill is Protect Our Letter Carriers because of a lot of the actions that take place with the keys to access the mail. But the sentencing still needs to also apply to any postal worker that's harmed, because we have sisters and brothers in our other crafts that are facing the public and dealing and interacting with the public who may be desperate and are put in harm's way as well. So I think it's important to make sure that all postal workers are need to be protected. Thank you.
Mark, do you want to add anything there?
No.
Okay. Let me pivot over to this one then for you, Mark. As the Postal Service turns 250 years old this year, as prepares for a leadership transition, what do you see as the sort of biggest opportunity for building a stronger, more trusted Postal Service for workers, for customers, and for the country?
Simple question, no? Well, look, we're optimistic.
You're going to live a long time.
You're
going to be alive a long time.
Yeah, right. We're optimistic about the future, okay? There are those that want to destroy us. There's those who want to limit. There are those who want to privatize entirely, privatize partially. But the times are changing. Times changed when Morse code came in with communications. Time changed when the telephone came in with communications. And it certainly changed with the internet. And again, we've seen the decline of letter mail. It doesn't mean it's not unimportant. It's extremely important to people. But with that, we've seen a rise in package. So package growth is very important to a vibrant future. But so are new and enhanced services. The post office could do so much more. Many posts around the world do basic banking and financial services. We had a postal service savings bank between, I think it was 1911 and 1967, so it's not an odd or alien or radical idea. But even short of postal banking, there's a lot of financial services that could be provided to build on the financial services that we already provide, let's say, with money orders. Things like fishing licenses, hunting licenses, EV charging stations in front of post offices, internet access where there's none. There's so many things that we can build. You know, the mission of the post office under the law is to bind the nation together. And there's so many things we can do through a local post office as communications change to bind our communities and our people as in a solid together way in our relationship with the postal system and postal workers. So we think, and by the way, it does bring in some revenue, which is always good and needed. And so we are very keen, and I think I speak for all of the postal unions, on getting those new services, expanded services, new ideas. For instance, somebody just raised, I was at a conference a few months ago, that a lot of the clearance through TSA was being done now in the private sector. You could go to, I can't remember the store, it doesn't matter, but you could go to some department store and get clearance. Well, why not do that through the post office? And we have a great example of those kind of services at the federal level with passports. And we could do a lot of that. And the 2022 law gave us new opportunities, the Postal Service Reform Act, to do new, what they call non-postal services with local governments, state governments, and tribal governments. And we ought to drive through that door and figure out all sorts of new ways we can serve the people of the country as we go forward.
Brian, let me come back to you for this question. So Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said in recent interviews that Postal Service employees should take the place of census workers to cut costs for the 2030 census. This is an idea that comes up around every decennial count, but has never happened. Is this something that USPS employees are well positioned to do?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I don't think Secretary Lutnick was aware of this when he made the comments, but several years ago, we did an extensive test with the Census Bureau that involved postal employees doing all parts of the census. The then administration, both the presidential administration as well as the leadership at the Postal Service was apparently not interested in pursuing that. But it really piggybacks well on the question that Mark just answered. Our network of physical locations, retail locations, post offices, our delivery network puts us in a position to do so many different things. There are recent examples of this. We did significant work with packaging and delivering test kits during the pandemic for COVID. The census is one example of something that we could leverage that network to do. There are so many other things that we can do beyond just mail delivery. We have done tests, I think the statute of limitations is up on this. We've done tests over the years with the Department of Defense to carry sensors and things like that that would detect dirty bombs. There's all sorts of possibilities. This is a very important point to make, that when the Secretary mentioned that, while we support 100% doing that type of thing, the only way the Postal Service can do things like that is through maintaining this network, maintaining the universal service that we provide, maintaining our status as a public service. Any attack, partial privatization, any reduction in the service we provide ultimately results in destroying that network and eliminating, probably for good, our ability to do things like the census, like the COVID test, or any other things that we might want to do to serve the people of this country in the future.
Before I ask this final question, let me just take a moment to thank Headliners team leader Jen Judson, Headliners team members who assisted with today's events, Jamie Horwitz and Chuck Porcari, as well as Club's executive director Didier Soji, and the entire staff for making it possible. And finally, thank you to our audience. We hope those of you working in media will join us this Friday, March 28th, for Career Day at the National Press Club. If you're looking for your next job or networking opportunities, this is the place to do it. Mark, Brian, and Don, rather than putting these in the mail, let me present each of you with a National Press Club mug as a small token of our thanks. And thanks to all of you in the audience. I'll pass these down. There you go.
Thank you. Put you for that.
And now we'll close with a final question. So for each of you, with Postmaster General DeJoy stepping down and major reforms already underway, what will you be watching most closely in the months ahead? And what should the public, the media, and Congress hold USPS leadership accountable for as the next chapter begins?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. It seems like every day there's breaking news when we open up, look at our phone first thing in the morning. That's not always a good thing. We could use a little bit of calmness out in the waters, but that's not necessarily what's going to be happening. American public, the American people need to stay vigilant and stay aware of the things that are happening behind the scenes, statements that are said, balloons that are being floated out there to see what's going to work and what might not work. The threat is very real. We're not crying wolf. We believe that, as they say, the hounds are at the door. This public institution has been around for 250 years. We want to see it around for another 250 years. But the American people need to make sure, in a bipartisan effort through Congress, that we stay vigilant, we stay alert to what the news is actually saying, what's real news, what's not news. But when you read in between the lines, there's a lot of comments that cause all of us up here alarm, and should cause everybody out there alarm as well, and the American public and the individuals that I speak for, the rural carriers out and the rural customers, rural communities out in America. We need to stand up and make our voices heard that keep the United States Postal Service a service to the American people, and don't let it be dismantled and portioned out to the highest bidder and potentially lose any service that you might have. So just stay aware and make your voices heard. We the people. Thank you.
Well said, Don. Not much more to say. I'll just say this. The people of the country, we have to make sure our pockets aren't picked by these billionaires. The Elon Musks of the world, speaking to J.P. Morgan a few weeks ago, Wall Street again, he says he's for privatizing everything, and then singles out Amtrak and the United States Postal Service. So to the people of the country, we have to understand that privatization, in whole or in part, will raise prices, close post offices, reduce service, and undermine good living wage union jobs for hundreds of thousands of people, including many veterans, equal pay for people from all walks of life, no matter what gender, et cetera. So that's what we're facing. And Don's absolutely right. We're not crying wolf. It's a serious threat, but we believe that the people are not going to allow this to happen as long as they know what's happening to them. We don't want to be the frog being boiled slowly in the water, and then all of a sudden we're cooked. So a lot of what we're trying to do is to let the people know what's happening, why it's happening, where it's driven from. It's going to come down to whether whatever package and mail service is left after privatization is done on the basis of making a profit and a quick dollar, or whether it's going to continue to serve everybody on a universal service basis, no matter who we are and no matter where we live, and that small d democratic right that this belongs to the people, not to the billionaires. Keep it, it's yours. And the U.S. mail is not for sale.
Thank you, Mark. The most important thing is that whatever action is taken is designed to strengthen this service that the American people rely on. That starts with, of course, maintaining it as a public service,
right,
maintaining our universal service obligation. And while there have been, reporting of consideration of obvious attacks, I think kind of the ironic piece is that there's opportunity here to strengthen this institution for the next 250 years. It is just as relevant, if not more relevant, than it's ever been before. The work we do has changed some. But as we hear talk about privatization, which is motivated by the same thing privatization talk has always been motivated by. It's motivated by private business that wants the pieces of the work the Postal Service does that are profitable. End of story. That is the primary motivation behind it. But as we look forward, the opportunities that the administration has, the opportunities that the Congress has, the opportunities that the people have to strengthen this service are there. This is not a political issue. No matter how the people in this country voted in November. Some voted for President Trump, some voted for Vice President Harris. What they did not vote for is to destroy the Postal Service that is delivered to them every day their entire lives. So it's not a political issue. So while we fight this battle every single day to do everything we can to stop the consideration of drastic moves that would impact the service, such as privatization, even in part, we have to remember that there is opportunity for this administration and for Congress through some of the policy changes that we've talked about, through nominating and confirming people to the Board of Governors that share the vision of what Americans want from the Postal Service in the future, regardless of their political affiliations or who they voted for, to put leadership in place that believes in public service, can strengthen, modernize the service to fit the needs of the American people as we go forward. Those opportunities are there. They are opportunities that are supported by a vast majority of Americans. That's come out through polling. That will come out more in the future, regardless of where they live, regardless of what their political views are. So this is something that should not be a partisan issue. So we intend to continue to fight any threats, of course, but also in just as strong a voice to advocate for the changes that are best, of course, for the employees that we represent, but are best for the people in this country that continue to rely on the Postal Service every day.
Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everybody.
Nice job.